Since voters approved criminal justice reforms 5 years ago, Oklahoma has seen its prison population trend downward, relieving the pressure on the crowded detention centers. The next phase of criminal justice reform will be considered during the next legislative session as those who prosecute the crimes develop new recommendations for sentencing. That's where we go in depth with Susan Cadeau and her guests to see how far we've come and the road ahead.
Thank you, Jason. I'm here with a couple of very special guests to help us sort through what has happened since these measures went into effect. First, we have Felicity Rose, who is the Director of Research and Policy for Criminal Justice Reform with fwd.org, forward.org. And then we have Keaton Ross, who's a criminal justice reporter with Oklahoma Watch. I want to thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, we're going to dive in just to refresh everyone's memory. State Question 780 became effective in July of 2017. And basically what it did was it made possession of controlled dangerous substances a misdemeanor, and it lowered the larceny threshold from $500 to $1,000. Felicity, I want to start with you. What impact have these changes in the law made in Oklahoma so far?
State Question 780 has had a really great impact in Oklahoma. Prior to this passing, possession was the #1 crime for which people went to prison in Oklahoma. So thousands of people were sitting in prison just because in most cases they had an addiction problem. And now that has been changed. So first it was changed prospectively, and then Governor Stitt and the legislature enacted that retroactively in 2019. So a lot of folks got to go home. So that's had a really positive impact on reuniting families, not punishing people for addiction. At the same time, we've seen crime rates go down across the state. We've seen property crime rates go down, violent crime rates go down. So you're really seeing a shift. Now, there's a lot more to do, but I think we did see really positive effects from that first large reform.
Well, Keaton, what about you? I know you've been keeping an eye on this. What have you seen so far?
Sure. So those reforms took effect, as Felicity mentioned, back in 2017. And since then, we've seen a pretty significant drop in our state's prison population, especially beginning back at the start of the pandemic back in March 2020. Over the past 18 months, our population has dropped about 13%. And of course, some of that is due to delays caused by the pandemic, court cases being delayed, county jail transfers suspended, that kind of thing. But criminal justice advocacy groups certainly attribute some of that to the reforms we've seen, such as State Question 780.
I want to talk about the part that raises the felony larceny threshold from $500 to $1,000. There was a comment from the president of the Oklahoma Retail Crime Association. They presented data to the council, and the council I'm talking about is the Oklahoma Criminal Justice Reclassification Coordination Council. That's a long name, but the council, his report showed that shoplifting cases jumped 11% in the last year, while total dollars lost has increased by 37%. He explained to the group that State Question 780 and 781 have emboldened shoplifters. Felicity, have you heard anything about that? Have you seen a trend there?
Well, we have heard that anecdotally, but all the data goes in the other direction. So we think it's really people looking for a problem that's not really there. So all of the data shows that crime is down. When we're talking about shoplifters, there usually weren't shoplifting over $500 worth of goods before 780. So it seems a little bit strange to think about that changing a lot of behavior. You think about someone going into a Quick Trip, they're, and stealing some beer or snacks or whatever they're stealing, that's not going to add up to $500. So the fact that changed from $500 to $1,000 is really not that's not going to change the behavior of those kind of shoplifters. Now, there are other things that happen in the system that could change behavior. Some of what we hear from the retailers is, well, they don't even report the crimes anymore because the police don't respond. That has nothing to do with 780. That's something that could be solved in a different way than sort of recriminalizing behavior and sending people to prison, which actually makes them more likely to commit crime in the future and doesn't help anybody.
Keaton, have you seen anything from folks who don't like 780 and 781? Why don't they like it?
Yeah, I've heard similar things. As you mentioned, the president of the Retail Crime Association pointing his argument is basically that while the number of crimes hasn't increased, people are stealing more valuable goods, and they've been emboldened to take thousands of dollars worth of stuff when they otherwise might not have because of these changes. Believe we've seen a slight uptick in the amount of goods stolen. But of course, you have to take into account stuff is more expensive than it was 5 years ago due to inflation and that sort of thing. So I haven't really seen data that suggests there's been a retail crime explosion since 780 passed.
But aren't there like organized shoplifting, folks who are organized, have multiple people who go in, not to convenience stores, but to maybe department stores and really can pull off some high expensive shoplifting capers. Is that not true?
I don't know whether those really exist or not, but that is still a felony in Oklahoma. So if you have an organized retail theft ring, there are other laws besides shoplifting that they can be prosecuted under. They can be prosecuted as a conspiracy, which is a felony carrying prison time. So I don't think that the sentencing law is the problem for holding those folks accountable.
Well, Felicity, what is the Oklahoma Criminal Justice Reclassification Coordination Council? What is that and what do they do?
That council was formed in 2018 to look at felony sentencing in the state of Oklahoma. They were given a mandate to come up with a new felony sentencing system that would hold neutral or reduce the prison population. So it was supposed to be a next step in reform and really looking at sentencing across the board in Oklahoma. They've come out after 3 years with their recommendations and are ready to move those back to the legislature for consideration. However, the recommendations they made do not meet their mandate of reducing or holding neutral the prison population. They're actually expected to increase the prison population. So we have a lot of concerns about that.
So how do you fight against that? And either one of you can answer that, Keaton or Felicity, because how do you fight against the measures that are coming out of this particular group? There are some heavy hitters in this group.
Yeah, I mean, certainly then the group is composed of several different people, district attorneys, former judges, representatives from the Department of Corrections. So there's several different stakeholders and certainly several people with influence in the state and in criminal justice in Oklahoma. I think certainly we'll see in the months ahead before this is presented to the legislature, the beginning of next year, certainly advocacy groups speaking out and presenting their research and trying to speak out on how they see this will affect the state's prison population and things going forward. Certainly, I would expect some back and forth over the next couple of months.
Well, I was going to say, would this negate what 780 did? And do you expect the legislature to just go along with it? What do you think, Felicity?
It would partially negate what 780 did. What this proposal does is it reorganizes every crime into one of 14 felony classes. And it doesn't change sentences very much for most crimes. They stay pretty much what they are now, but it includes additional requirements for people that will lead to them spending longer in prison for the same sentence, which from our perspective and from a research perspective is just a waste of taxpayer money, because you're basically taking someone who's already serving a very long sentence. Oklahoma has some of the longest prison sentences in the country. And then saying, okay, you're going to serve 5 extra months on your sentence. You can earn less credits. You're not going to get out on parole as early. So you're just going to be stuck there for longer, and taxpayers are going to pay for that 5 extra months. And that's primarily for people with nonviolent crimes that's going to affect in that way. And so we're basically taking back some of what the what the voters said they wanted, which was to reduce the number of people going to prison, and saying, now we're going to hold people in prison just a little bit longer, just because we think it creates a better system, but it doesn't really have any good effect.
So State Question 781, which was passed simultaneously with 780, created the County Community Safety Investment Fund, which is intended to hold cost savings created by reclassifying as misdemeanors certain property crimes and drug possession. However, that savings is not yet materialized. What do either one of you know about that?
I haven't done any in-depth reporting on it personally, but I know the Frontier, another outlet similar to us, has reported on it. And what lawmakers told them and have been saying is that they've been following the spirit of 781 and trying to allocate more money for mental health programs to county jails. But a lot of those county jails are saying we just don't have the resources to deal with these influx of people coming in with mental health issues. Certainly there's, as these crimes are, changed from felonies to misdemeanors and they're not being sent off to state prisons as much, that can often fall back on the county jails as they're awaiting sentencing and for their case to proceed. So there's definitely still a struggle statewide to properly treat people in jail who are struggling with mental health issues.
Overcrowding at county jails is a whole different discussion. Yes, go ahead, Felicity.
Yeah, just on 781. So the legislature, Department of Corrections, OMES, everyone agreed this last year that there have been savings from 780, and they identified about $10 to $11 million that have been saved because of the reduction of people going to state prison. The problem is appropriating those dollars and getting them to where they're supposed to go. So in 781, all those dollars were supposed to go back to the counties to decide what they were going to do with them. But this year, the legislature instead decided to put them towards specific state programs that they thought maybe were going to be more effective, but that wasn't really what the voters had said they wanted. The voters said they wanted that money to go back to the counties for the counties to decide what they needed to help that population. And that's what hasn't happened. So there are savings. There's a significant amount of annual savings that have been identified. It's just a question of where that money is going or not going.
Well, do you see any pushback coming for that from the counties or from voters? Or do voters even know? What do you think, Keaton?
I think possibly there's been the expectation that the law passed 5 years ago and everyone's been doing what the law said and what the voters decided on. So I think certainly that public perception regarding what's going on in the county jails might not quite be there.
So what do you think needs to happen next? Felicity, I'll give that to you. What do you think needs to happen next?
Well, in terms of the funding, I think it's really important that funding does get back to the people on the ground who need it. It was meant to be for substance abuse treatment and mental health treatment, and people in Oklahoma are in dire need of help with that. So I hope that money can get down on the ground to those folks. For the Reclassification Council, going back to that briefly, they are putting forward these recommendations. I think there's a lot of opportunity to make them better. There are some good things in there. And I just really hope the governor and the legislature take a hard look at them. Those recommendations aren't set in stone. They can change them, and they could change them to make them work better for the people of Oklahoma, and reduce the prison population rather than increasing it again.
And Keaton, I know as a journalist, I'm not going to ask you what you think, but what do you expect to see happen with all of this in the next session?
Like I mentioned earlier, I think we'll certainly see some back and forth as far as as lawmakers and the public dive into what exactly the recommendations are and what the implications are. I certainly think we'll see some back and forth and differing sides on how exactly is this going to be implemented and what impact is it going to have. I think we've certainly gotten to the point where a vast majority of the legislature is on board with a lot of criminal justice reforms as far as helping people get out of prison and reintegrate into society, get jobs. We've seen legislation recently making it easier for people released from prison to get, identification and driver's licenses. So I don't think there's, a will to lock more people up. But as far as the implications of this, it'll be interesting to see, what different sides argue and what, the implications of this law will be.
Right. Yeah. No one wants to see people locked up. So there's going to be a lot of push on this. As we wind down, Felicity, I want to ask you real quick, your organization, it's forward.us and it's FWD, right? Not the full word. What do you do in relation to this issue?
Yeah, we're a national political advocacy organization that works directly in states with really high incarceration rates like Oklahoma. Yeah, the most recent numbers have Oklahoma at number 3. So there is an improvement, slightly better, but still a long way to go. Oklahoma's still locking up a lot of folks compared to the rest of the country.
I want to thank both of you for your time and for this valuable information for the people of Oklahoma. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.